Memento mori, a Latin phrase that translates to "you must die." It's a simple reminder of our mortality, a reminder that life can end at any time, and that we shouldn't let the limited time we have on Earth go to waste. People are understandably scared of dying. Many think of death as the absolute end, that once life is over, that's it, that's the end. Nothing left. A never-ending void where we spend the rest of eternity. There are many people who also think of death as a new beginning, that there's something waiting for us on the other side once we cease to exist in this world. Whatever your belief, one thing is clear. Death is unavoidable. That's going to be a running theme throughout this game and video as a whole. Death and the passage of time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning. Persona 3 began development sometime after work on Nocturne and Digital Devil Saga had concluded. The early 2000s was not a good time for Atlus. For years, they'd struggle with maintaining an audience outside of Japan. A lot of their releases would either go under the radar or receive mild success. What wasn't helping was that veteran staff were starting to leave the company one by one. Something needed to be done quick. The Persona series had begun as a way for Atlus to try and expand their audience. With the company in dire need of new players, history was beginning to repeat itself, so director Katsuda Hashino proposed an idea: another Persona game. One random day in 2003, Hashino strolls into the office with a design document. The writing on the front cover of the document was written as if a revolutionary figure was behind it. Quote, "To the troubled 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and all the unfulfilled souls afflicted by worry, the revolution is coming. Don't miss the bus." End quote. This was Hashino's way of saying that the time for change in the studio has come and that there's no time to waste. Persona 3 was revealed in a March 2006 issue of Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu. Within the article were details explaining mechanics such as combat, time management, the school life aspect, fusion, and a lot of other stuff. The game was due for release on July 13, 2006 in Japan. Regions outside of Japan were not yet given a release date. For this title, Atlus veteran Shigenori Soejima was brought on to be the main character artist and art director. He had done sprite work and designed character portraits for Devil Summoner 1 and Soul Hackers, and he had also worked on the character portrait and environmental design in the Persona 2 duology. The previous art director, Kazuma Kaneko, gave him this position so that he'd have more experience with this role. Because he was given such a massive position, Soejima felt a lot of pressure going in because, as he put it, the game's commercial success rested on his shoulders. With Soejima in charge of art direction, one major change was having the UI stand out in a way that would allow it to service gameplay and aesthetics. Now, we can't talk about Persona 3 without talking about its music. The composer for this game is Atlus veteran Shoji Meguro. His body of work is huge, spanning all the way back to 1996, with his first game being Persona 1. Shoji would then go on to compose music for Nocturne, the Digital Devil Saga duology, and subsequent Persona titles and spin-offs. He'd pretty much composed music for all of the PlayStation 2 SMT titles at this point. Outside of Shin Megami Tensei, Shoji has made music for titles such as Maken X, which is a criminally underrated game, the Trauma Center games, and even Catherine. Persona 3's music can best be described as a blend of jazz, rap, and pop, with some electronica thrown in. The two main vocalists for this game's soundtrack is rapper Lotus Juice and singer Yumi Kawamura. Lotus's rapping can mostly be heard during battles, with his fast-paced lyrical delivery and tone getting the player hyped up in the heat of combat, while their thoughts race as they flip through the menus deciding what action to take next. Kawamura's vocals can be heard in the game's overworld, offering the player a sense of relief after an intense session of dungeon crawling. Yumi's also featured famously as the background singer in Mass Destruction, which is the main combat theme of this game. It's safe to say that Lotus Juice and Yumi's vocals complement each other in this song very well. Even better is that the duo would return to sing music for female MCs route in Persona 3 Portable. Not only that, but Yumi also sang for the intro of the vanilla version of Persona 3 and FES. She never made an appearance in Portable's intro, with it being sang by Shuei Keita. Now let's talk localization. Persona 3's localization was headed by senior project manager Yu Namba and editor Nick Maragos. Namba is no stranger to localizing Atlus titles. Before Persona 3, Namba helped localize the Western release of Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, Shin Megami Tensei 3, and both of the Digital Devil Saga games. Maragos helped localize Devil Summoner and Persona 3, and he was also the project manager of the Etrian Odyssey series, which are some really good games, by the way. Maragos would later go on to be editor for other major projects such as Persona 4 Golden and Shin Megami Tensei 4. At a panel at Anime Expo 2008, Yu Namba talked about what went into localizing Shin Megami Tensei and Persona in the Western world. He talked about Persona 1's botched localization and Persona 2 only launching its second game in the West. When it came time to localize Persona 3, the localization team elected to keep all references to Japanese culture intact. Honorifics being retained in the English dub made interactions between characters feel a bit more genuine, since their use in the Japanese language is dependent on who's being spoken to. With the Persona series being grounded in Japanese culture, keeping in the honorifics makes a lot of sense. The voice actors chosen for the main characters is what I can only describe as an all-star cast. You've got Yuri Lowenthal and Tara Platt, both of whom were doing voices for Naruto at the time, Karen Strassman, the voice of Soifone from Bleach, then you've got Michelle Ruff, who voiced Rukia Kuchiki, Liam O'Brien, the voice of Gaara, Vic Mignogna, who was pretty much an English dub superstar for anime at the time, Derek Stephen Prince, the dude who plays Uryu, aka the best Bleach character, Grant George of Tales of Vesperia fame, and finally, Valerie Aram, who would go on to voice Naoto in the Persona 4 spin-offs. These guys do a great job at letting their voices match the personality of each character. From Junpei's excitable and happy-go-lucky charm to Mitsuru's stone-cold and business-like demeanor, the cast did really good. Although, admittedly, there were times where the voice work is very poor. Not only that, but there were times where some of these guys would end up voicing other characters in the game too. I imagine that the localization team was working on an airtight budget and could only work with what they had. You gotta remember that this was Atlus USA in the 2000s. It's a miracle they were even able to localize the PlayStation 2 SMT titles year after year like that. With the release of Persona 3, the franchise would be given a new lease on life outside of Japan. On July 13th, 2006, Persona 3 was released in Japan and the rest of Southeast Asia. North America would get the game a year later on August 14th, 2007. Europe and Australia would finally get this game after having to wait another year, with Europe getting it on the 29th of February 2008 and Australia getting their hands on it on the 6th of March that same year. On April 19th, 2007, 9 months after Persona 3 launched in Japan, Atlus released an enhanced version of the game called Persona 3 FES, or as everyone else calls it, Persona 3 FES. Rolls off the tongue better. This expansion includes many tweaks to gameplay. New personas have been added, a new social link is available, the way some social links are handled has been tweaked, there's now a hard mode, there's a new weapon fusion feature that allows you to create weapons from fused personas, new side quests have been added, and many other tweaks. And finally, one major addition is a new story mode called The Answer. The Answer is the epilogue to the main story, which is known as The Journey. Don't worry, I'm gonna try to cover The Answer in a separate video. In November of 2009, Atlus would release Persona 3 Portable for the PSP. North America would get the game in 2010, and Europe would finally get it in 2011. 12 years later, in 2023, Persona 3 Portable would be remastered for consoles and PC and released worldwide in late January. Persona 3 Portable is a somewhat stripped-down version of its PlayStation 2 counterpart. Due to it being, well, portable, many changes had to be made in order for it to fit on a UMD. Instead of walking around in 3D environments in the game's overworld, the player would instead navigate using a cursor on a map of wherever they are. 3D environments would instead be reserved for dungeon crawling. Conversations would be carried out in the style of a visual novel, with no 3D models present. The anime cutscenes weren't safe either. What Atlus did was take screenshots from those cutscenes, throw on character portraits in a dialogue box, and put in the original audio from the scene itself. One major addition to Persona 3 Portable was the addition of a female protagonist. Femc's route, as some people like to call her, Femc's route is more than the game's story from her point of view. There are new social links and new cutscenes. Persona 3 Portable was and still is a controversial game due to its presentation and how Femc's route was handled. With the preamble out of the way, it's time to dive deep into the world of Persona 3 and discover the secrets behind the Dark Hour. Persona 3 opens up with a message to the player, reminding us that time waits for no one, and that we have a year to safeguard the future. The text fades, and we're shown scenery of a vibrant city with people carrying on like usual. The camera then focuses on a young man walking through the streets carrying an MP3 player with music blasting in his headphones. In between shots of the city streets is a young woman lying on the floor holding a gun in her hand. She takes the gun and places the barrel against her head. Her breathing becomes more rapid, and just as she's about to pull the trigger, she lets go of the the gun and falls to the floor in tears. This is quite the tone setter. Right off the bat, the game lets us know what we're gonna be in for. It's a stark contrast, the bustling neon-drenched streets filled with people having a good time without a care in the world, and a woman sitting on the floor at the point of no return, trying to build up the courage to take her own life. The heavy breathing, the hesitation, it's all so real. The young man from earlier arrives at his stop at a train station in the city of Iwatodai. Just as he steps off, the world around him drastically changes. The electricity is cut, the environment has a dark green hue, and all liquids have turned blood red. Oddly enough, he doesn't have a reaction to this and continues toward his destination as if nothing's changed. Stepping into the entrance of a building, the young man is greeted by a mysterious boy wearing striped clothing. The boy tells us to sign a contract that says that we agree to accept all responsibility for our actions. We're then taken to a screen to name our character. The protagonist of this game has two canon names. In the Persona 3 manga, he goes by the name Minato Arisato, and in the movies he's called Makoto Yuki. I decided to go with the name Minato because I just think it sounds cooler. I've never understood the whole deal with the writer for the manga giving him one name and the writer for the movie giving him another. Regardless, it's not worth losing any sleep over. The contract is signed and the boy tells us that no one can escape time and trying to do so is useless. He disappears, and shortly after, a panicked young woman bursts into the room with a gun in her holster. She's about to draw, but another woman tells her to stop and the lighting in the room returns to normal. The red-haired woman introduces herself. Her name is Mitsuru Kirijo. It turns out that the building we've entered is a dormitory for students attending the nearby high school, and we've been transferred here last minute. The girl in pink asks if it's a good idea for Minato to be here, but Mitsuru assures her that it's fine. Mitsuru introduces the girl in pink as Yukari Takeba. Yukari will be a junior, and she'll be attending the same high school as us. Mitsuru says that everyone should get to bed, and Yukari leads us to our room. When asked about the boy seen at the front desk, Yukari says that she has no idea who you're talking about. She then asks if everything was okay while we were leaving the station, and we tell her that everything was fine, and she heads back to her room. Something's definitely up, and Yukari and Mitsuru know more than they're letting on. Fast forward to the next morning and we're getting ready for school. Yukari knocks on the door and says that Mitsuru asked her to walk with you to school since you're new to the area. The two board a light rail train to Tatsumi Port Island, an island that lies just east of Iwatodai City. This is Gekkokan High School, and this is also where you'll be attending class for the entire game. When the two arrive, Yukari tells us to go see our homeroom teacher in the faculty office. Before parting ways, she reminds us to never tell anyone about what we witnessed the previous night. Yukari leaves, and we can move around a little. At the faculty office, we're introduced to Miss Toriyumi, our homeroom teacher who teaches composition. She goes over our file, and it's revealed that Minato moved around a lot during his childhood, and in 1999, his parents died. Well, she doesn't really say it, she just implies it going off of her reaction, but yeah, his parents are dead. It's not a JRPG without a pair of dead parents or two, am I right? Toriyumi gives us our class assignment, but before the school day can begin, we've gotta go to the welcoming ceremony. The ceremony itself is pretty unremarkable, outside of a student trying to find out if Yukari's single or not. Once the school day is over, we're greeted by a guy named Junpei Iori, a friendly and laid-back slacker who's also close friends with Yukari. The two tend to banter a lot, with Yukari roasting the hell out of Junpei whenever the opportunity arises, and honestly, Yukari gets him pretty good. We walk home with Junpei and make it back to the dorm by nightfall. The dormitory is sort of a hub for the player, where they can save their game, study, and talk to the other students. I really like the vibe they went with when composing the soundtrack for the dorm. The music really gives off that feeling of relief from coming home from a long day at school. Fast forward to later that evening, and we cut to Mitsuru in the dorm's lobby speaking to a man in a red vest. He says he's going out to investigate the strange occurrences that have been happening around town lately. Mitsuru also points out that a lot of normal people are suddenly coming down with a condition known as apathy syndrome, and the news has picked up on the slowly growing epidemic. The media blames it on stress, but only these two know the true cause of the illness. The guy in the red vest only sees this as a challenge for himself, and he eagerly leaves the dormitory. Oh yeah, the dude's name is Akihiko, by the way. When we arrive at school the next day, we overhear a conversation between two students talking about a first year who stopped attending school and does nothing but stare blankly at the wall all day and sometimes mutters to herself. Something about this place isn't right. Later on in the day, the game introduces lectures to us. School lectures in Persona 3 is basically a quiz game. If you answer correctly, you'll gain a point toward one of your social stats. If you answer incorrectly, no points are awarded. Social stats play a role in determining which characters you can interact with, called social links. There are 3 social stats: academics, courage, and charm. Academics is the easiest to grind because all you have to do is study at your desk or in the library. Courage is gained from singing at a karaoke lounge, and charm is gained from a cafe that serves special coffee. All 3 of these stats are split between 6 different ranks, and you can only interact with certain people depending on where your rank is at. So if you have some free time and there's no one to hang out with, try grinding for points towards any one of your social stats. Also, I highly recommend googling each pop quiz answer and getting them all correct, since that's just one more point to add to one of your stats without having to sacrifice time that could have been spent doing something else. The school day ends, and the game gives us a tour of this little strip mall in town. When Minato arrives back at the dorm, he's introduced to a man named Shuji Ikutsuki. Ikutsuki is the chairman of the board for Gekkokan High, and he makes regular trips to the dormitory to check up on the students. He says that it's going to take a little longer for us to get the proper room assignment. When asked about how many students live here, he says that the only 4 people in the dorm are Yu, Mitsuru, Yukari, and Akihiko Sanada. The reason Ikutsuki is here is to welcome Minato. When Minato speaks up and says that he saw something strange the previous night, Ikutsuki quickly takes control of the conversation and chalks it up to Minato being tired. Everyone here is hiding something, and they seem really intent on keeping whatever's happening a secret. Ikutsuki excuses himself to go upstairs, and he suggests that you go to sleep early, and then he caps it off with a corny pun.
You should go to bed early. As they say, the early bird catches the bookworm. Please forgive the pun.
You'll get used to his lame jokes.
Yeah, Ikutsuki's kind of a dork. Later that same night, Ikutsuki, Mitsuru, and Yukari are all watching a large computer monitor. It turns out that they've installed a hidden camera in your room and are watching you sleep. The reason for this is not yet known, but that answer will come to light soon. By the way, is anyone else creeped out by 3 teenagers and a grown-ass man all watching another teenager sleep via a hidden camera in their room? Ikutsuki mentions that the dark hour is fast approaching, and the game cuts to an animated scene of the streets of Iwatodai. Everything's going pretty normal until the atmosphere changes to the one seen at the start of the game. The streets are lined with coffins, and the only person outside is a random man, and then his face starts leaking a strange black liquid as he screams in terror. The game cuts back to the computer room where Ikutsuki reveals more about the Dark Hour. The Dark Hour is a hidden hour in the day. It starts at 12 o'clock midnight and lasts for 60 minutes. During this period, our time is put on hold until the 60 minutes are over. When the Dark Hour is active, ordinary people are transformed into coffins. Anyone outside of a coffin either suffers the same fate as the dude from that previous cutscene, or they possess a special ability called the Potential, which allows them to be awake during the Dark Hour without any issues. Shuji's impressed that Minato hasn't been turned into a coffin, but he wants to monitor his sleep for a few more days just to be sure. Again, this is really creepy. Yukari also feels really bad for invading his privacy when he's only just arrived here. Elsewhere, we're brought to a strange room with strange people. Sitting across from us is a bald old man with a long nose and a black suit. Accompanying him is a woman with short hair and a dark blue dress. The room itself is a dark blue elevator speeding upwards with no end in sight. The strange man introduces himself as Igor, and the woman's name is Elizabeth. Igor says that it's been years since they've had a guest, which is most likely a callback to Persona 1 and the Persona 2 duology. He shows us the contract we signed at the start of the game and tells us that only those whom have signed the contract are allowed to enter this room. He goes on to mention that we're gonna need his help in order to hone our unique ability. In return, Igor wants us to abide by the contract and take responsibility for every choice that we make. We accept his terms and are given the Velvet Key, and we leave. The following morning we wake up, and according to the text box, we feel like we had a strange dream. I mean, a dream where you're in an elevator with a guy like Igor is a step beyond strange. Minato meets up with Junpei at the school gates, and he's full of energy. He wants to tell us something, but he can't say anything about it just yet. In class, another mechanic is introduced where the player can choose to either stay up to listen to the lecture and get points towards their academic stat, or they can fall asleep and get back the energy they need for dungeon crawling. I recommend just staying awake because those are points that you absolutely cannot miss out on. The Dark Hour strikes again, and we cut to the computer room where Ikutsuki, Mitsuru, and Yukari are all monitoring Minato's sleep patterns via that hidden camera. Ikutsuki says that Minato is unusual because those who have the potential tend to be unstable at first. They tend to experience memory loss and disorientation. Minato hasn't experienced any of those symptoms yet. Yukari still feels guilty over invading his privacy and treating him like a guinea pig, but Ikutsuki says that while he understands her concerns, it's imperative that they're able to recruit new members. Their observation is interrupted when Akihiko buzzes in and says that he's being chased by something huge, and he's retreating back to the dorm, bringing the creature with him. Mitsuru decides that it's time to prepare for battle. Akihiko makes it back to the dormitory, but he's been injured by whatever's been chasing him. When asked about what's been pursuing him, Akihiko says that it wasn't an ordinary one, and suddenly the building is shaken. Mitsuru orders Yukari to go upstairs and wake up Minato and escape through the back. She and Akihiko are gonna take this enemy on. We're woken up by the commotion, and Yukari bursts into our room. There's no time for her to explain what's happening, and the both of us need to get the hell out of here. Before we head downstairs to escape, she gives us a short sword just in case. When we get to the back door, Mitsuru contacts Yukari via walkie-talkie and says that the enemy she's fighting isn't the same one that chased Akihiko. The creature begins banging on the back door, which means that Yukari and Minato need to find another escape route. The duo retreats upstairs with the enemy in heavy pursuit. They finally make it to the rooftop, and Yukari locks the door behind them. This thing is far from over though, because that creature decided to climb the side of the building to catch up with them. The creature reveals itself, brandishing knives and making its way towards the two. Yukari tells us that these monsters are called shadows, and she pulls her gun out, pointing the barrel at her head. The shadow then throws a projectile at her, causing her to lose grip of the gun. The gun falls at Minato's feet.
Go on.
There! Wait!
Persona.
Thou art I, and I am thou. From the sea of thy soul I cometh. I am Orpheus, master of strings.
As we suspected.
Minato's persona Orpheus is awoken. For a moment, Minato's feeling real powerful, but then all of a sudden, Orpheus's body is briefly taken over by another persona called Thanatos, whom relentlessly assaults the shadow before disappearing. Everyone watching in the computer room is left stunned at Minato's awakening. They'd never seen anything like this. Orpheus disappears, but more shadows appear on the rooftop. Minato rushes in head first and throws down with the remaining shadows. I'm gonna go over combat a bit later. This doesn't feel like the right time to talk about it yet. The shadows are quickly taken down, but Minato falls to the floor and blacks out, having his mind and body overexerted from his persona's awakening and the fight that followed. While knocked out, Minato finds himself in that strange room again, the Velvet Room. Igor tells us that we became unconscious after awakening to this power and that there's no need to be alarmed. We're told about the power of persona, with it being described as a manifestation of our psyche. He also says that it's a facet of our personality and changes depending on external stimuli. We just have to think of it as a mask that protects us and allows us to brave the hardships of our day-to-day lives. This is where the concept of analytical psychology comes into play. Analytical psychology, more popularly referred to as Jungian psychology, is a method of psychotherapy developed by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung. This form of psychotherapy is centered on the symbolic aspect of the human experience. Within analytical psychology are archetypes. These are patterns, thoughts, and ideas that play a role in shaping who we are. There are 12 archetypes in total, but the Persona games focus a lot on two: the persona and the shadow. The persona is a proverbial mask that we wear in everyday life. It's a sign of ourselves that we show to one person or the other, depending on who they are, where we're at, and how we engage with that person on a regular basis. For example, think back to when you were a teenager. At school, you'd say and talk about things to your friends that you'd never say in front of your parents. But at home, your words are more carefully chosen around your parents and relatives, and you leave the persona you put on for school at the door. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all do it. Hell, we have to do it. The shadow is somewhat similar to the persona. Our shadow is a part of ourselves that we look away from, a part of ourselves that we know exists but knowingly deny. It's something that we repress, and sometimes we aren't aware this side to us exists. These are our deepest, darkest secrets about ourselves that we don't like acknowledging, yet it keeps showing up in the back of our minds. There's no need to be alarmed though, as having a shadow is completely normal. It's all part of the human experience. It becomes a problem when your continued denial of your shadow manifests into something unhealthy, or worse, manifests in you saying or doing something that leads to dire consequences for yourself or other people. The best way to deal with this is to accept this negative aspect of yourself, whatever it may be, and learn how to overcome it. Simply running away from the problem won't change anything. Igor tells us that our persona ability evolves as we develop our social links, which is our connections and bonds with other people. The stronger these links are, the stronger our personas will get. After explaining all of this, Igor decides that it's time for us to part ways, but before we do, we're told that the next time we meet will be of our own accord. And then he sends us back to the world of the living. Well, we wake up in a hospital 1 week later with Yukari on our bedside. Man, forget ibuprofen. The best sleep aid apparently is gaining the power of a guardian spirit. Yukari tells us that the doctor couldn't find anything wrong with us and that we were incredibly exhausted. We're then told about how amazing our power is because, well, we're the main character after all. Then she gives us a brief rundown on what shadows and personas are and tells us that she's gonna explain everything else later. Yukari then opens up about how her parents aren't around. Her dad died in an accident when she was younger, and her mom sleeps around a lot, leading to mother and daughter having a tense relationship with each other. The reason she's opening up about this is because she knows we were orphaned, and she can relate to us not having parents around. Yukari's father was killed in a large explosion on Port Island in 1999 in a laboratory run by an organization called the Kirijo Group. She hopes that if she sticks around longer, she might be able to get to the bottom of what caused the blast and what her father was up to before he died. That's also her reason for attending GeckoCon in the first place. Yukari apologizes for hiding all this from us, but she's relieved that she was able to get this off her chest. The conversation ends, and she heads back to the dorms. The following day, there's an important meeting at the dorms, so Minato decides to inexplicably take a walk through Polonia Mall, introducing us to the many different social links we'll be engaging with throughout this game. Once at the dorms, Ikutsuki says that he needs to talk to us about something big. He starts by giving us a rundown of what the Dark Hour is. The Dark Hour is a hidden hour nestled between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock AM. However, when the Dark Hour begins, normal people don't know that it's happening, and they won't remember that it happened in the first place. Not only that, but normal people are turned into coffins or transmogrified, putting themselves in a comatose-like state. Any normal person that was awake during this time won't remember anything about the Dark Hour or whatever took place while it was active. Those unlucky enough to be awake and come across a shadow will be attacked and they'll be turned into what's called a lost, a person whose mind was consumed by the shadows, leaving them in a vegetative, zombie-like state. These people are afflicted with the aptly named apathy syndrome, which is starting to become a problem across the city. Also, during the Dark Hour, all electrical devices will stop functioning unless it was manufactured by the Kirijo Group. The Kirijo Group is pretty much like the Speedwagon Foundation from JoJo. They don't have powers, but they develop technologies and such to assist the main cast. Ikutsuki introduces the team before us as SEAS, or the Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad. Now tell me that's not a badass name. In school records, SEAS is officially classified as a school club, though how the school hasn't inquired about this club is unknown. SEAS's main focus is defeating shadows and investigating the Dark Hour. Mitsuru is the leader, and Ikutsuki is the club advisor. Mitsuru believes that the shadows are responsible for a series of incidents around the city. Ikutsuki then tells us that though there are few people whom can function during the Dark Hour, there are a special few whom can wield the power of persona, the manifestation of your psyche. Persona users are the only ones who can defeat shadows, which means that investigating the Dark Hour and keeping the city safe is up to us. Mitsuru opens up a briefcase containing a pistol and a red armband bearing the SEAS logo. She lays it out for us. She wants us to join them. Minato accepts and is welcomed as an official member. Once we're in, we unlock the first social link of the game, card 0 of the Major Arcana, the Fool. I'm gonna talk more in depth about social links in a bit. The mysterious boy from the start of the game appears in Minato's bedroom and warns him that the end is coming soon. When he says the end, he means the end of everything, but he doesn't know what that end is. He also notices that we now possess the power of persona.
A power that takes many forms, yet is bound by none.
The boy says that this power might be some sort of salvation to us, but that depends on where we end up, and he's expecting us to honor this commitment. He warns that he'll be watching us, even if we forget about him, and then he disappears into the night. The following evening, Akihiko calls Yukari and Minato into the lobby and says that he wants to introduce someone to us. That someone turns out to be Junpei, and he's gonna be moving in. Akihiko says that Junpei has the potential and he only recently awoke to his persona. After Akihiko told him about C's, Junpei agreed to join them. Turns out that Aki had found Junpei crying at a convenience store during the dark hour. I love that this is how we're introduced to Junpei's powers. No dramatic buildup, no freak accident, no weird experiments, just Junpei crying outside some store and walking it off like it's nothing. You know, I've been thinking about this for years, but what exactly is the potential and how do you get it? Potential is a word in this game's vocabulary that's thrown around with only vague meaning attached to it. Is it a genetic disorder caused by the dark hour? Does it come from a person with a strong psyche? There's a lot of questions I have surrounding this word and its use in the context of Persona 3. All we know about the potential is that anyone who does have it is able to stay awake during the dark hour, remember everything that happened during the dark hour, and summon a persona. Getting back to Junpei, he says that the whole crying thing is normal for Persona users whom have just awoken to their newfound powers, although Akihiko shuts that claim down real quick. He's also relieved to know that he's not the only one with this kind of ability. Once introductions are out of the way, Akihiko says that they're ready and they have a sufficient number of people in this group to go exploring a place called Tartarus. Little side note, you're going to be seeing a lot of references to Greek mythology throughout Persona 3. The name Tartarus comes from Greek mythology, and it's a place where the Titans were kept as prisoners. Akihiko believes that they can find the truth about the Dark Hour if they investigate Tartarus. Ikutsuki's gonna fill us in more about it the next evening. During lunch, Mitsuru walks in and says that she needs everyone in the dorm lobby tonight for another important meeting. She doesn't elaborate, and then she leaves. Then the game does that thing where it pans the camera over a shopping center that's full of all of the people we can form social links with. Everyone's at the dorm waiting for us. Once seated, Ikutsuki tells us about the increase in Persona users and announces that starting tonight at 12 o'clock AM, C's is to commence exploration of Tartarus. With Junpei and Minato being the only new members in the room, they don't have any idea about what it is or what it looks like. Despite shadows appearing in the streets, a majority of them reside in Tartarus. Since shadows are starting to become a problem around the city, and since Tartarus seems to be where they gather, it'd be appropriate to investigate it and see what answers they can find. Because Ikutsuki can't use a persona, he decides he's gonna stay behind while the rest of C's is off exploring. The crew makes it outside the gates of Gekkoukan High. Junpei is confused about why they're meeting outside the school, and Akihiko tells him to just wait. This is Tartarus, and exploring this place will be our key in finding out the truth behind the Dark Hour.